The rancher lived alone for years, until he saved an Apache warrior woman left for dead. John Callahan had lived alone for nearly 10 years on his ranch in the wide, open plains of Arizona. The land stretched endlessly, a mixture of golden grasses, dusty paths, and low, rolling hills that touched the horizon. From sunrise to sunset, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the smell of dry earth and the occasional scent of wildflowers that had stubbornly grown among the rocks. To most people, such isolation would have felt unbearable, but John had learned to live with it. The loneliness was both his punishment and his comfort. Before the solitude, John had lived a different life. He had a small family, a wife and 2 children, and the house on the edge of the town was always full of noise, laughter, and warmth. But that life had ended abruptly, leaving him broken. The world outside the ranch had become too heavy, too full of reminders he could not bear. Friends and neighbors tried to reach out, but he avoided them, finding safety only in the quiet rhythm of the land. Every day followed the same pattern, yet each day was a struggle to keep the ranch running and himself alive in the harsh wilderness. He rose with the sun, the first light spilling across the sky in shades of pink and orange. The mornings were his favorite part of the day. There was a calmness in the world then, a moment before the sun climbed too high and the heat became relentless. John would step outside his small wooden cabin, built by his own hands, and breathe in the dry, crisp air. The smell of pine and sagebrush mixed with the earthy scent of soil warmed by the rising sun. Out on the porch, he would sip coffee from a chipped mug and watch his cattle graze quietly in the distance. The land seemed alive yet serene, and for a few moments John could almost forget the pain of the past. After breakfast, it was time to check on the ranch. The fences needed repair almost constantly. Years of wind and storms had worn them down, and predators sometimes tried to get in, threatening the herd. John had learned every inch of his property. He could tell where a fence was weak just by the way the ground sloped, by the direction of the wind, and by the tracks left behind by coyotes or stray dogs. He worked tirelessly, hammering nails and tightening wires, his hands rough and scarred from years of labor. The work was hard, but it kept his mind occupied and gave him a sense of purpose. Evening brought another type of labor. John would ride out across the plains, checking on the cattle and making sure none had wandered too far. Sometimes he would ride for hours, the horses' hooves beating softly against the earth. The horizon seemed endless, and at times the vastness of it made him feel both insignificant and free. He liked to imagine that the land itself was a friend, silent but understanding, offering no judgment. He could speak aloud if he wished, and the wind would carry his words across the prairie, but no answer was needed. That silence, that companionship of the earth was enough. Yet not every day was peaceful. The desert was harsh and unforgiving. Summer storms could appear suddenly, with dark clouds rolling over the horizon and lightning cracking across the sky. John had experienced the fury of nature many times. Once a storm had destroyed part of his barn, leaving him to rebuild it from scratch while soaked to the bone. Heat waves in summer could make even the strongest person weak, while winters brought freezing temperatures and snow that blocked the roads, leaving him cut off from the nearest town. Still, he endured. He had no one else to rely on but himself, and he had learned to respect the land and its dangers. Despite the hardships, John had routines that brought him comfort. He would spend hours fixing tools, sharpening knives, and maintaining the old, creaking machinery he depended on. Each repaired fence post, each mended tool was a small victory. He also tended a small garden near the cabin, where he grew tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. The work of planting and nurturing plants reminded him that life, even in this harsh environment, could flourish with care and patience. Sometimes, he would eat fresh vegetables straight from the garden, feeling a rare moment of joy and satisfaction. Though he lived alone, John was not completely disconnected from the world. He occasionally rode into the nearby town to pick up supplies, though he did so reluctantly. The people in town knew him as a quiet, solitary man. He rarely spoke more than necessary, and he avoided gatherings or conversations that felt intrusive. But people respected him, partly because of his skills and partly because of the way he cared for the land and his cattle. If someone needed help with a broken fence or lost livestock, John would show up without hesitation. In that sense, he remained connected, even if he preferred to keep his distance. Memories of his family often returned uninvited. He would think of his children laughing in the yard or his wife cooking in the kitchen. Sometimes, the weight of those memories would feel unbearable, and he would spend long nights staring into the darkness outside his cabin. The wind would moan through the cracks in the wood, and he would hear echoes of the past. Yet, over time, he had learned to carry the memories without letting them consume him. He told himself that he had chosen this life, that the solitude had given him a way to heal, and that he could survive on his own. Even in the loneliness, there were small wonders. John loved the wildlife on his ranch, the coyotes that howled at night, the deer that wandered across the fields, the hawks that soared high above in search of prey. He understood their rhythms, watched their patterns, and sometimes marveled at their resilience. The connection he felt with animals was different from human connection, but it was deep and fulfilling in its own way. He would often talk to them as if they were old friends, laughing softly to himself when a curious calf approached or a hawk landed nearby. John's life on the ranch was simple but demanding. Every day required attention, effort, and endurance, yet he found beauty in that simplicity. The sunrise over the plains, the sound of a creek flowing in the distance, the quiet moments of reflection at dusk, these were his treasures. He had learned that life could be hard, but it could also be rich and meaningful in unexpected ways. Each day he survived, and each day he discovered something new about himself and the land he had come to call home. Still, deep down, a part of him remained closed off. He had built walls around his heart, walls that had kept him safe, but also prevented him from truly feeling alive. For years, he had believed that solitude was the only way to protect himself from the pain of loss. He had grown accustomed to it, even proud of his ability to endure alone. But little did he know that the quiet rhythm of his life was about to change, that the endless plains he called home were about to bring someone into his world, someone who would challenge his solitude, test his skills, and awaken emotions he had long buried. For now, however, he remained alone, tending his cattle, repairing fences, and walking the fine line between survival and despair. The land stretched endlessly around him, a world of beauty and danger, silence and solitude. And in that vast, open space, John Callahan existed as a solitary figure, a man shaped by loss, resilience, and the quiet determination to endure. Each day was a test, each sunrise a promise that he could survive, and each sunset a reminder that tomorrow would come, with all its challenges, and perhaps someday its unexpected surprises. One blazing afternoon, John was riding along the northern boundary of his ranch, checking fences and counting the cattle grazing in the sparse grass. The sun was high in the sky, turning the plains golden and hot, and the air shimmered with heat. His horse, a sturdy chestnut named Dusty, moved steadily over the dry earth, occasionally kicking up small clouds of dust. John shaded his eyes and scanned the horizon, as he had done countless times before. But that day, something unusual caught his attention, a figure lying motionless among the low bushes near a creek. At first, he thought it might be a fallen deer or some other animal, but as he rode closer, he realized the figure was human. A woman lay face down in the dirt, her clothing torn and her skin covered in cuts and bruises. Blood had soaked her sleeve and streaked the ground beneath her. She was breathing faintly but barely. John's heart tightened. He had seen injured people before in town, but never like this, abandoned and helpless out in the wild. Despite years of living alone, he knew he could not leave her there. He dismounted slowly, keeping Dusty calm, and knelt beside her. "Hey, you're going to be okay," he said gently, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. Her eyes fluttered open slightly, dark and wary, and she let out a weak groan. Her hair was tangled with dirt and small twigs, and her face was streaked with blood and dust. John carefully examined her injuries. She had deep cuts along her arms and legs, bruises across her ribs, and a gash on her forehead that was already swelling. She must have been left there for hours, maybe even a full day. "Can you move?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. She tried to lift herself, but her strength was gone. She weakly shook her head. John looked around. The nearest town was miles away, and calling for help wasn't an option. He had to get her to his cabin, and fast. He carefully lifted her onto his horse, making sure she wouldn't fall. She flinched at first, her body stiff with pain and fear, but John spoke softly, reassuring her as he guided Dusty back toward his ranch. The ride was slow and difficult. The woman groaned occasionally, and John kept checking her injuries. He murmured words of comfort, though she didn't seem to understand him at first. Her language was unfamiliar, and he could tell she was not from the nearby town. Something about her face, her dark eyes, and the way she carried herself suggested strength, even in weakness. She had the posture of a warrior, though she was battered and broken. John felt a deep sense of responsibility. He had never been a man to leave anyone behind, and he would not start now. When they reached the cabin, John gently helped her inside. He laid her on a bed he had made with simple blankets, then went to fetch water and clean cloths. He washed the blood and dirt from her wounds as best he could, using water from the nearby well and his own hands when necessary. He had some basic medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, and salve, enough to treat injuries until she was stronger. She flinched at every touch at first, but he was careful and slow, making sure not to hurt her further. Hours passed. John worked quietly, tending her injuries and giving her small sips of water. He could see the strength of her spirit in the way she tried to lift her head, the way her eyes never completely lost focus despite the pain. He realized she was a fighter. She had survived something terrible, and yet she was still alive. John felt admiration mixed with concern. How had she ended up out here in the middle of nowhere with no one to help her? He set her food near her, a small portion of beans and bread, though she was too weak to eat. He sat in the corner of the room, watching her, thinking about what to do next. He had lived in solitude for so long that helping someone like this felt both natural and foreign. It had been years since he had taken care of anyone besides himself. But in that moment, he realized that helping her might be as much about saving himself as saving her. His heart, long hardened by loss and loneliness, felt the stirrings of hope and purpose once again. Over the next few days, John settled into a routine with her. He gave her medicine for the pain and infection, changed her bandages, and ensured she was comfortable. She slept most of the time, exhausted from the ordeal she had survived. John rarely left her side. He would prepare meals, tend the fire, and keep watch outside for danger. He spoke softly to her, even though she often did not understand, repeating simple phrases like, "You're safe now," and "You'll be okay." Over time, she began to recognize the sound of his voice, turning her head toward him when he spoke. As her body healed, John noticed more about her. She was lean and muscular, with hands that showed signs of strength and skill. Even in her weakened state, there was a fierceness in her eyes. He learned that she moved with careful precision when she tried to sit up or adjust herself, as if she had been trained for endurance and survival. John respected that. He understood what it meant to be alone in a harsh environment and to rely entirely on one's own skills to survive. This woman had survived something unimaginable, and he felt a growing admiration for her courage. Communication was challenging. She spoke a language John did not know, and he only knew basic Spanish words from occasional travelers in town. Yet they found ways to understand each other. Simple gestures, pointing, and careful observation allowed them to communicate basic needs. Slowly, a bond began to form. She trusted him enough to let him help her, and he trusted her strength and resilience. It was a fragile trust, built slowly through shared effort and care. By the end of the first week, she was strong enough to sit upright without assistance. John watched as she began to eat solid food, regain her color, and even smile faintly at small jokes he made. She remained cautious, never letting her guard down completely, but the tension in her body began to ease. John felt a sense of relief. He had saved her life, yes, but he realized that her survival also demanded more than just tending wounds. It required patience, understanding, and respect. During one quiet evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, John noticed her studying the landscape outside the cabin window. He asked if she wanted to see the ranch. She nodded and he helped her stand, steadying her as she took in the vastness of the plains. Her eyes widened, taking in the grazing cattle, the flowing creek, and the distant mountains. John saw a mix of awe and sadness on her face. He guessed that she had come from a world very different from his, a life with people, with community, with movement. Yet she had survived here on the open plains against incredible odds. As the days turned into weeks, John continued to help her recover. She began to move more freely around the cabin and even outside. He showed her small tasks, how to gather firewood, how to check on the animals, and how to navigate the land safely. She watched closely, learning quickly. Though she had been a stranger, John began to see her as a partner in survival. They shared the labor of living in the wild, and slowly, the cabin that had been so quiet now felt alive. There was conversation, even if it was limited, and a sense of shared purpose that John had not felt in years. One morning, as John tended the garden, she approached him with a small bundle of herbs she had found nearby. She pointed to them, then to her mouth, indicating that she wanted to use them for healing. John smiled, impressed by her resourcefulness. He realized that her knowledge of survival was extensive, possibly far beyond his own. She had not only endured being left for dead, but had learned to adapt quickly to new situations. John felt a quiet admiration, mixed with humility. He had thought he knew the land, but she taught him that even the most skilled could learn from others. Despite the growing trust, John knew that she remained wary. Every so often her eyes would darken, her body tense, and she would retreat to a corner of the cabin. He understood. She had been betrayed, abandoned, and attacked. Trust was not something easily given, and he would have to earn it day by day. He did not mind. He had learned patience over the years, and he understood that healing was not only physical but emotional. As the weeks passed, their bond strengthened. She began to speak a few words in English, and John picked up some of her language as well. They shared small meals, worked together on the ranch, and watched the sun rise and set over the endless plains. The silence that had once been so heavy in John's life was replaced by the quiet companionship of two people who had survived against the odds. They did not need to speak much to understand each other. The shared experience of life, survival, and care was enough. One evening, as the stars appeared in the clear desert sky, she sat beside the fire, looking at the flickering flames. John joined her and handed her a cup of warm water. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of the wind through the sagebrush, and the crackle of the fire. John realized that in saving her, he had opened himself to a new kind of connection. His heart, long closed and hardened by loss, felt the stirrings of hope and companionship once again. The woman, who would later tell him her name was Naeli, had survived something unimaginable. Left for dead in the wilderness, she had endured pain, fear, and isolation. Yet through resilience, strength, and the help of a stranger, she had returned to life. For John, this encounter was no less transformative. He had lived alone for years, but in saving her, he discovered that life could still bring unexpected challenges, lessons, and even joy. The plains that had once been a world of solitude and survival now held the promise of something more, of trust, respect, and the fragile beginnings of a deep human connection. Weeks passed, and Naeli grew stronger. The injuries that had once left her weak and fragile were now healing under John's careful hands. Her bruises faded, her cuts closed, and her muscles regained the strength they had lost. Yet her spirit remained the most remarkable thing about her. Even in the midst of suffering and fear, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived unimaginable challenges. John could see it in the way she moved, the way she looked at the world around her, and the way she reacted to the simplest tasks on the ranch. At first, they had communicated only through gestures, pointing, and shared tasks. Slowly, though, they began to understand each other in small but meaningful ways. John had learned a few words of her language, while Naeli picked up some English phrases. Simple words like water, food, safe, and wait became bridges between them. They laughed quietly when miscommunications led to mistakes, when she poured too much water into a bucket, or when he misinterpreted a gesture, and the laughter eased the tension that had always been present in the cabin. One morning, John decided it was time to show Naeli more of the ranch. She had spent most of her recovery inside the cabin or nearby, and he wanted her to experience the land fully, to see that the plains could be both beautiful and harsh. He helped her onto Dusty, the horse, guiding her carefully. As they rode through the fields, the sun warmed their faces, and the wind whispered across the tall grasses. Naeli's eyes widened as she took in the endless horizon, the grazing cattle, and the distant mountains. She pointed at a hawk soaring above and smiled faintly, a gesture of wonder and recognition. They stopped at a small creek that ran through the property. The water was cool and clear, flowing over smooth stones. John helped Naeli kneel by the water, and she cupped her hands to drink. She washed the dirt from her face and hands, and John watched her with a mixture of pride and admiration. She had survived so much, yet she retained a deep connection to the world, a respect for life, and a willingness to adapt. He felt a quiet bond growing between them, one built on trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. Back at the cabin, their days settled into a routine. Naomi helped John with small tasks, like feeding the chickens, checking the fences, and gathering firewood. She learned quickly, her movements precise and careful, and John marveled at her resilience. She also shared knowledge of the land and its hidden resources. She knew which plants could be used for medicine, which berries were safe to eat, and how to find water in unexpected places. John realized that her skills complemented his own. Together, they were stronger, more capable, and better prepared for the challenges of life on the ranch. Despite the growing trust, Naomi remained cautious. She had been betrayed before, left for dead, and forced to survive on her own. John understood that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. He continued to speak gently, to give her space when she needed it, and to offer support without pressure. Over time, her walls began to lower. She asked questions about the ranch, about John's life, and about the land. She listened to his stories of past hardships and survival, and in turn, she began to share fragments of her own history. Naomi had grown up in a close-knit Apache community, learning the ways of her people from a young age. She had been trained in tracking, hunting, and survival, skills that now helped her adapt quickly to life on the ranch. She had also learned to respect the land, to understand the animals, and to recognize the rhythms of nature. Her upbringing had made her strong, independent, and resourceful, but it had also left her wary of strangers. John listened carefully, never interrupting, and offered understanding when she spoke of loss, danger, and betrayal. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John and Naomi sat by the fire outside the cabin. The air was cool, and the sound of the wind through the grasses created a soothing backdrop. John offered her a cup of tea, and she accepted, holding it carefully with both hands. For a long moment they simply watched the fire, the sparks drifting upward like tiny stars. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. It was a rare moment of peace, one that both of them had come to cherish. As the nights passed, their bond grew stronger. Naomi began to trust John not only with her body, but also with her thoughts and feelings. She spoke more freely, sharing memories of her family, her community, and the challenges she had faced. John listened with patience, offering empathy and encouragement. He shared his own memories as well, the ones he had long buried in solitude. He told her of the life he had lost, of the pain that had driven him to isolation, and of the quiet satisfaction he had found in surviving alone. By sharing these stories, they built a bridge of trust, connecting two lives shaped by hardship and resilience. During the day, they worked side by side on the ranch. John showed Naomi how to check the fences for weak points, how to guide the cattle through the pastures, and how to maintain the equipment. She learned quickly, sometimes suggesting improvements based on her own experience in the wild. He admired her intelligence, resourcefulness, and determination. The work was demanding, but it strengthened their partnership. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, communicate without words, and share responsibility in a way that felt natural and effortless. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the mountains, dark clouds filling the sky and sending gusts of wind across the plains. John and Naomi worked together to secure the livestock and bring them closer to the shelter of the barn. The rain came in heavy sheets, drenching them both, and lightning flashed across the horizon. They moved with precision, relying on each other's guidance and strength. By the time the storm passed, the cattle were safe, the fences intact, and the cabin protected. They stood together, soaked and tired, but victorious. The experience reinforced their trust in each other and their ability to face challenges as a team. Over time, Naomi began to explore more of the ranch on her own. She would walk along the creek, check the gardens, and observe the wildlife. John admired her independence and encouraged it, knowing that self-reliance was part of who she was. She taught him new ways to read the land, how to identify signs of approaching weather, where to find edible plants, and how to track animals. John felt a deep respect for her knowledge and skill. In turn, he shared his own expertise, showing her the details of ranching life that he had mastered over years of experience. As the weeks turned into months, their relationship evolved. What had begun as a bond of survival grew into something deeper. They learned to read each other's moods, anticipate needs, and offer comfort in quiet ways. Nayeli would help John with his meals, quietly observing his routines, while he would check on her injuries and ensure her safety. They shared moments of laughter, quiet reflection, and even gentle teasing. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now felt alive with companionship. Despite the growing closeness, John and Nayeli were careful not to rush. They both carried the weight of past experiences, and they understood that trust and connection took time to build. John continued to provide care and support, while Nayeli continued to show resilience, patience, and courage. Their shared experiences on the ranch created a bond that went beyond words. They had become partners in survival, learning from each other and growing stronger together. One morning, Nayeli approached John with a small bundle of herbs she had gathered. She pointed to his arm, then to the herbs, indicating that she wanted to use them to create a healing salve. John smiled, impressed by her initiative. Together, they worked on the preparation, combining his supplies with her knowledge of natural remedies. It was a small but meaningful act, symbolizing their growing partnership. They relied on each other, shared responsibilities, and learned from one another in ways that strengthened their bond every day. By the time summer was at its height, Nayeli was fully healed. Her strength had returned, and she moved with the confidence and agility of someone who had survived unimaginable challenges. She could ride, work, and navigate the land with ease. John watched her with pride and admiration, realizing that their connection had changed both of them. He had taught her some things, yes, but she had also taught him about resilience, trust, and the power of human connection. In saving her, he had discovered that he too could open his heart again, even after years of isolation and loss. Their story on the ranch was no longer just about survival. It had become a story of partnership, respect, and growth. John and Nayeli had built a life together, navigating the challenges of the land and learning from each other's strengths. They shared the labor, the triumphs, and even the quiet moments of reflection that made life meaningful. In the vast, open plains of Arizona, two people who had once been alone had found a connection that gave their lives new purpose and meaning. Months had passed since John had first found Nayeli lying injured on the plains. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, had transformed into a space full of life, activity, and companionship. The cabin no longer echoed only with the wind through the cracks in the wood. It now resonated with conversation, laughter, and the shared rhythm of two lives intertwined. Every day brought new tasks, challenges, and small victories, but it also brought a deeper understanding and connection between them. Nayeli had regained her full strength. She moved across the plains with confidence, climbing hills, walking along creeks, and working alongside John with skill and precision. Her hands, once fragile from injury, were now strong and steady. She rode horses with ease, guided the cattle with sharp eyes, and even began teaching John a few survival techniques he had long forgotten. Their partnership had grown from necessity into mutual respect and deep trust. Together, they were stronger, able to face the hardships of the land and the uncertainties of life. John noticed the changes in himself as well. The man who had lived years in solitude, hardened by loss and distrust, had begun to open his heart again. The silence that had once weighed heavily on him was replaced by the quiet comfort of shared presence. He no longer felt entirely alone, and he realized that life could be richer when shared with someone else. There was a lightness to his step, a calmness in his mind, and a warmth in his heart that he had not felt in years. Nayeli had not only survived, she had awakened him to the possibility of hope, connection, and renewal. Despite their growing bond, both John and Nayeli were aware that her past life called to her. Nayeli had been part of a community, a close-knit Apache group that had taught her survival, resilience, and the importance of family and belonging. She had been left for dead during a raid that had scattered her people. While she had found safety and care on John's ranch, she longed to reconnect with her community to ensure her people knew she was alive. John understood. He did not want to hold her back, even though the thought of her leaving made his chest tighten. One morning, John decided to help Nayeli reach her people. They packed supplies, blankets, food, water, and tools, and prepared for the journey. Nayeli examined the horizon, noting landmarks, hills, and paths she remembered from her past. She explained her plan to John, pointing to a distant ridge and tracing a route with her finger. Though the language barrier was still present, their shared understanding had grown so strong that words were no longer always necessary. They worked together efficiently, each movement coordinated and thoughtful. The journey was not easy. The plains stretched endlessly, and the sun bore down relentlessly. Dust and heat tested their endurance, while rocky terrain and hidden obstacles challenged their footing. Yet they pressed on, driven by purpose and mutual support. John marveled at Nayeli's knowledge of the land. She could sense approaching weather changes, locate hidden water sources, and navigate treacherous terrain with precision. Her skills, once honed for survival in the wild, now guided them safely toward her community. Along the way, John learned more about Nayeli's people. She spoke of the values they cherished: courage, loyalty, respect for nature, and the importance of family and community. She described ceremonies, stories, and traditions that had shaped her upbringing. Though he had never experienced her culture firsthand, John felt a deep respect for it. He realized that her survival was not just about physical strength, but also about the wisdom, values, and resilience instilled in her by her people. As they approached her community, Nayeli's excitement and nervousness grew. She spoke quickly, pointing to distant structures and familiar paths. John could see the anticipation in her eyes. He also noticed the apprehension. She had been away, alone, and vulnerable, and there was no telling how her people would react to her return. Still, he trusted her instincts and her skills. Nayeli had survived against incredible odds, and John knew she could handle this final challenge. When they arrived, Nayeli's people were initially shocked. Some had thought she was lost forever. Others feared the worst. Yet as she stepped forward, clearly alive and unharmed, relief and joy spread across their faces. They rushed to embrace her, and she returned their gestures with tears in her eyes. John observed quietly, understanding that this moment belonged to her and her community. Though he had played a critical role in her survival, the reunion was hers alone. The people welcomed him with cautious curiosity. John did not speak their language, but his actions had already demonstrated his integrity. He had saved Nayeli, cared for her, and helped her regain her strength. Their gratitude was clear in gestures, nods, and smiles. John felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not sought recognition or reward, yet the respect he received was enough. In that moment, he realized that acts of kindness, courage, and compassion transcend language and culture. Nayeli spent time reconnecting with her family and friends. She shared stories of her ordeal, describing the injuries, the danger, and the kindness of the man who had saved her. Her people listened with a mix of astonishment, relief, and gratitude. John watched silently, humbled by their connection and by the power of human resilience. Nayeli's journey had been perilous, but she had emerged stronger, supported by both her own determination and John's care. Before he left, Nayeli approached John. She took his hand in both of hers, a gesture of trust, respect, and deep appreciation. Though words were few, the message was clear. She would never forget him, nor the role he had played in saving her life. John felt a mixture of pride, sadness, and hope. Though their paths would diverge, the bond they shared would endure, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and human connection. After returning to his ranch, John reflected on the months that had passed. He had gone from isolation to companionship, from quiet survival to shared purpose. The land he had once seen as a refuge from loss now felt alive with possibility. He had learned that even the most isolated heart could be awakened by trust, respect, and human connection. In helping Nayeli, he had not only saved a life but had rediscovered his own capacity for empathy, care, and hope. The ranch returned to its familiar rhythm, but it was no longer a place of solitude. Memories of Nayeli, her courage, and their shared experiences lingered in the cabin, in the fields, and in John's mind. He tended the land with renewed purpose, repaired fences with a sense of pride, and watched the sunset with a feeling of quiet fulfillment. Life was hard and demanding, as it always had been, but now it also held the promise of connection, renewal, and the possibility of unexpected joy. In the months and years that followed, John continued to live on the plains, carrying forward the lessons he had learned. He remained a solitary rancher in appearance, but his heart was no longer closed. He understood that isolation, while sometimes necessary, could not replace the richness of human connection. He had seen firsthand how compassion, patience, and courage could change lives, both his own and those of others. Naomi's return to her people did not sever the bond they had formed. Letters, occasional visits, and the shared memory of survival and trust kept their connection alive. John knew that he had been part of something extraordinary, a story of resilience, humanity, and renewal that would remain with him forever. The plains, with their harsh beauty and endless horizons, had witnessed not only survival but the awakening of hope, the rekindling of trust, and the enduring power of human kindness. In saving Naomi, John Callahan had rediscovered his own strength. He had learned that life was not only about enduring the land, but also about opening oneself to trust, connection, and shared purpose. The man who had lived alone for years had been transformed, not by grand events or fortune, but by a simple act of compassion. A life saved had saved him in return, teaching him that even the most isolated heart could learn to beat in harmony with another. The ranch remained, vast and untamed, but it was no longer merely a refuge from the world. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the unexpected joys of connection. John tended his cattle, repaired fences, and walked the plains with Dusty by his side, carrying the quiet knowledge that life, no matter how lonely it may seem, always held the possibility of renewal. And somewhere across the plains, Naomi thrived with her people, carrying the memory of the rancher who had given her a second chance at life, and reminding John that even in the harshest landscapes, the human heart could find a way to heal, grow, and connect.